Last time on the WizardCast.
Hey, Mark. I was cleaning out the closet.
You mean avoiding working on the disaster plan?
Jalapeno, jalapeno. I mean, I found this old ring here. You want it?
Is that a ring of power?
What?
I mean, it looks like one. Do we have like a fire or something we can toss it into and we can check it out?
Nope, but I got some really hot coffee.
Yeah, try it.
Hey, there's some writing appearing on it.
What?
Yeah, that's the one ring, all right. But I can't wear another ring my wife wouldn't approve. Here, you take it.
You will give me the ring freely?
Yes. In place of a co-host, you would have a king. Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn. All shall love me and despair.
I'm sorry, what? I couldn't understand a word of that. Can you repeat that?
You know what? Never mind. Let's just toss this thing out. Doesn't do any good to possess unlimited power and rule over all if everyone's always asking me to repeat myself.
Okay, now we just need to find the chocolate volcano from which it was made.
And now the conclusion of the WizardCast.
I'm Brian Kwong.
And I'm Mark Ross.
We're Salesforce experts that love talking about technology and Salesforce.
We also love humor. Doesn't mean we're actually good at it.
In the Salesforce community, I'm known as the Salesforce Wizard, likely due to me wearing a wizard hat at Salesforce events.
And I'm known as Salesforce Yoda for pretty much the same reason.
You should see the ears.
We have a passion to help educate and entertain people.
So we've joined forces to create WizardCast.
We've got tips and best practices.
We talk with interesting people.
All mixed with quote-unquote jokes and humor.
Welcome to the WizardCast. Mark?
Yeah. What are we,
Your turn to do the joke.
Joke? What joke?
We do our stupid plot, we do the introduction, the music, and then we have a joke.
Was that my
Before
turn?
We do some banter? Yeah.
Wait a second. Oh, I asked for this, didn't I?
Yeah, you wanted to write the jokes.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have a joke. I wrote this plot line. I wrote the story.
We're supposed to have a joke.
I did my part. I'm sorry.
Well, we do have a really good guest. We could just roll that.
Yeah, we could go straight to it.
Okay.
Just not do a stupid joke.
Jimmy, play the clip. We are on site with our guest this episode.
Live in the halls of justice.
We're really excited to be here. Ooh, look at the statues. I'm sorry. Our esteemed guest is the IT leader at the Henny Pen Theater Trust, and he's the co-host of Campfire Stories podcast. He can leap tall buildings with a single bound, assuming they're made out of Lego. Welcome, Justice Sikakane.
Gentlemen, thank you. I appreciate the unprecedented introduction. I can't say that's occurred in the past before. I'm glad to be on the one and only WizardCast podcast. Thank you.
Better be only one, otherwise there's litigation pending.
Yeah, we do a lot of things that nobody else will do, so
Yeah, so, Justice, we have you here primarily to talk about Campfire Stories, which is a podcast you do with Stacey Cogswell. And I know you started, when was it, 2017? No,
what,
started January.
ecosystem?
Yeah, you started January 2018 was your first episode.
Yes.
Right?
That's correct.
So you've been podcasting now for about a year and change. Tell us, what is your podcast about?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Brian. Myself and Stacy were at Dreamforce with a group of friends that has gone by many aliases, one commonly known as the Gift Squad. And that first came into fruition back in 2016 when we all ended up together at Midwest Dreaming. A lot of us didn't know each other, but we got to know each other at Midwest Dreaming. And I created a DM at the time. And what we were doing is we were tweeting a lot with GIFs. So we got to know each other. We then went from there to becoming the Gift Squad for Good. And we started identifying different ways that we can give back to the community through a shared a shared love for gifts, essentially. And that evolved and turned into a group of 9 to 10 of us. There's a lot of us in there: Bill Powell, Monica Sandberg, Benjamin Balapiu, Stuart Adil, and we just got to know each other really well over the years. So fast forward to Dreamforce 2018. At this point, Samantha Safin, whom you know really well, we had evolved from maybe one or several of us being MVPs to like 90% of us being MVPs. Stacy and I were like the only exception at this time. And Stacy had branded us as RPs, which by her definition meant regular people, which was kind of funny. So
funny, but not true.
Right. Well, I appreciate it. So one particular evening, the MVPs went out for an MVP dinner, I think, which you guys are probably more familiar with however that works. Stacy and I happened to be hanging back out at our respective hotels, and she had DM'd me and said, this was actually later that evening, but basically she DM'd me on Twitter and said, man, I have a good idea. And I said, what's up? She said, we should start like a podcast and just share stories as if we were near a virtual campfire and allow people to just kind of share their unique, authentic stories. If it had to do with Salesforce subject matter expertise, so be it, but really just give people the space and the grace and the platform to kind of share with us, you know, what they had going on in their life, because we felt there was a lot to people's journeys that basically position them to bring their full authentic self, that eventually introduce them into the ecosystem. So Campfire Stories is really about allowing folks to kind of just share their journey and, you know, what makes them feel unique and how they feel they play a role within the Salesforce ecosystem, not exclusively dependent to how many certifications or what their subject matter expertise is. However, we don't really have a structured agenda, but there will be some things that we will tee up in, you know, before we start interviewing a guest, in terms of saying, hey, you know, what we may ask you what your favorite trailhead badge is, just different talking points that could trigger a lot of conversational topics around the Salesforce ecosystem and how they've learned. But if not, we just want to, it's very organic.
So Justice, what's
Yes,
your
sir.
favorite trailhead badge?
That's a great question. My favorite trailhead badge is change management.
Ooh.
So that's an older trailhead badge. This is a badge and a module that goes around. One of the things I've talked about in the past with Dreamforce and Midwest Dreaming is, how do you create a governance strategy and process based on several key components? Change management, based on Salesforce's methodology, talks about the importance of a center of excellence, the importance of communicating and documenting a release management strategy, and then the significance associated with design standards. That is kind of where I had my revelation in terms of understanding Salesforce best practices with implementing change by going from business objectives to solutions in Salesforce. So I love that badge. Is a near and dear badge for me.
You see how he was ready to react? I tried to throw him off by throwing his own question back at him, and it totally didn't work. Like, he was ready for me.
I know. I
thought about it for a second.
Why are our guests better at this than we are?
No, I wouldn't.
Maybe because they have more experience being guests? No, that doesn't make sense. I know from my own personal experience talking with people in the community that, yeah, there's a lot of very interesting stories out there. Who would you say, you don't have to name a name if you don't want to, but what would you say is one of the most interesting stories, one of the ones that just kind of resonated with you the most?
This is interesting that a name is coming to my name's coming to my head immediately off the bat. Somebody I wouldn't have thought of referencing for this question just because I don't know them really well. Her name is Ashley Allen. We interviewed her. She's one of the founders of IT Equality.
Episode 15.
Yes. We interviewed her on the podcast, and she just really had a very interesting and authentic story and journey that it's just very difficult for me to think of anyone else. And there's a lot of amazing people, but I just love Ashley's presence. I love her leadership. I love who she is. She's just an amazing individual. and everything about her is inspiring to me. So that's who I think of, Mark. That's a good question. I mean, I love all our guests, and I love a lot of people in the ecosystem. Brian, obviously, you, Mark, you.
Yeah, but I've never been on your podcast.
Well, let me call Stacy.
Actually, you should call her. Just see if she wants to jump on.
Oh, love it.
Wow.
So you're up to episode 17 right now. As a matter of fact, I listened to it to prep for this podcast because I remember when you first started Campfire Stories, I listened to the first episode, and then my life just goes crazy. And I'm lucky to listen to our own episodes, let alone other people's. So I started listening to a few of them, and it was just you and Stacy talking about some milestones and events that have happened to you. I noticed your episode was from June, and we're now in August. Are you on a summer hiatus?
That's a great question. So Stacy and I actually, when we first developed in fact, we did this all in Quip, which is actually kind of cool. But when we started developing a cadence of when we were going to be interviewing people, it was going to be every week or every other week, I think was the plan. But you just alluded to something that's very interesting, and it was the consistency with being available to coordinate, schedule, and meet with somebody on a weekly and even a bi-weekly basis is unbelievably difficult. You think it's a straightforward thing, where it's like, oh yeah, you know what? We'll reach out to 4 or 5 people every week. We'll build this inventory. We'll schedule a time. Everything will just be beautiful. And we just struggle, guys, trying to stay consistent. So Stacy will email me from time to time and say, I feel like we should interview somebody soon. And I'll email her randomly and be like, you know what? I feel like we should, of the 4 or 5 people we've said that we want to interview, we should probably just schedule something. And then I'll be traveling or she'll be traveling. So no, we are not on a hiatus. We are just trying to stay consistent.
If this was a video podcast, you would have seen Mark and I nodding our head very empathetically.
This all sounds very familiar.
Very, very familiar. And it's very amusing to me because technically speaking, this episode should have aired today, August 5th. But because of scheduling conflicts, our episode is not out today. Who knows when it's going to be out at this point?
Yeah.
Depends on Mark's editing time.
Listen, I was just recently traveling. I haven't had a lot of sleep. I almost bailed out last second for this episode. It looks like I'm awake. I mean, I literally woke up maybe 5 minutes before I joined on this call because I was like, let me drag myself to this episode. Otherwise, another scheduling conflict. I'm just exhausted, guys. With work and travel and whatnot, but no, you're interesting.
Sounding just as eloquent as I'm doing on a good day. so
it's true.
I guess true. Podcasting isn't for everyone, Justice. Why are you doing it with Stacy? I mean, not why are you doing it with Stacy, but why are you and Stacy doing the podcast and continuing to try to go through all the scheduling conflicts to do the podcast? Because it's a lot of work. It's not like any of us are making money off of this.
Right. I think Brian, that is actually a great question. I think I can speak on the behalf of Stacy and I, the impact and the value that it has to even just one listener is significant. The self-esteem that is built upon our guests that come on that are well distinguished and well established in their particular domain area, for them to have an opportunity to kind of just share their journey, you'd be surprised how empowering it is for them. And more specifically, I think of somebody like Rachel Park, our first episode, she's a breast cancer survivor. I mean, to this day, she shares the fact of how grateful she was to be on our first episode. And she reminds us daily, right? And our first episode was over a year ago. So you never know who's going to be inspired. And we always have at least one or several people that reach out to us on DM, whether it's to the both of us or to Stacy directly or me directly, and say, hey, I listened to this particular episode and I was going through this and it changed my outlook on how I'm going to move forward with my life. This gave me the extra, 3 weeks of motivation that I felt, my tank was depleted. And that to me is everything, because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to maintain and sustain, this journey we call life. So if we can speak some inspiration into the lives of people by sharing the story of another, then that's everything. Whether it's 5 listeners, 500 listeners, or 5,000 listeners. I mean, Stacey and I don't do this for the views or anything of that nature. In fact, I don't even really look at the analytics or whatever, to be quite frank with you. We do talk about it from time to time, but that's not a driving force for us. You know, we don't put a lot of financials into marketing and things of that nature. I mean, our podcast is pretty straightforward. We have an intro now at this point, but it's really about the content than anything.
You know what I like, Justice, is you started mentioning with Rachel Park and that being your very first episode. But I can't help but notice your episode 2 is with Vala Afshar. So
I know.
you went from someone talking about overcoming cancer and the fear of failure to the chief digital evangelist. That's quite a leap in difference of people. So I haven't listened to that episode, so I have to say, how was it? Should I go listen to it? Should we all listen to it?
We were very early on. Looking back, we probably should have waited a little bit later in terms of how we matured to really maximize on being able to have somebody like Vala Afshar on the podcast. And by maximize, I mean like the audio quality. We were still learning the importance of, you know, be in a quiet room, Justice, when you're talking with Vala Afshar versus kind of in an open room with sound effects and the windows open and that sort of thing.
And screaming children, yeah.
And screaming children. So that was a learning experience. But Vala Afshar, at this point, you know, he's a great guy, but to be able to give some insight, you know, because if you follow Vala Afshar on Twitter, I'm sure you guys are well aware, it might seem like a lot of things are repetitive, the things that he's sharing, and it's pretty excessive. But Vala Afshar gives some insight into why he tweets as much as he does and the level of humility, you know, and the imposter syndrome, and his kind of story is very inspiring as well. But yes, I mean, Vala Afshar obviously is very influential in the community. I think what we were doing at that time is we were just saying, who do we think our listeners would like to hear from? And Vala Afshar happens to be somebody that I look to as a mentor and a friend. So I reached out to him and he said, absolutely. So usually he says yes when I reach out to him about stuff. That's
great. I mean, I completely understand the feeling of saying, hey, you would wanted to wait till you've gotten the audio stuff on and you've done the lessons that it seems like we all have to go through. You know, that's one of the reasons why we haven't had Parker Harris on the podcast, as much as we joke about it. Cause like, had we even posted our first episode yet, Mark, when we asked him the first time?
Parker?
You've interviewed him?
Yes.
No, we asked if he would come and guest on our podcast. I want to say we were like 3 episodes in.
Yeah, we had some. We definitely had some.
3 to 4 episodes in, and we just had this opportunity to come up to him 2-on-1 and ask him, and he said, "Sure, yeah, send us an email, we'll arrange it." And that was 4 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
We've never been comfortable going back and going, yeah, we're ready now if you're still interested in doing it, and because we always felt the same way, like we want to have prepared questions. It's one of the reasons why we ask for questions. By the way,
but you know whom you guys have had is Peter Coffey.
Oh, and we love Peter.
This is like one
Peter
of the
doesn't
most
need
respected
questions.
people I know.
Peter doesn't need questions. You hand him the microphone and he just goes.
Whatever's on his mind, and it's always fascinating.
Yep.
And I always thought I always love that the last time we talked to Peter, he gave us the nice little credit. It says, "Oh, I always like talking to you because it helps me formulate my thoughts before I do a presentation." I'm like, Peter's the only person I can talk to that I walk away feeling smarter and dumber at the same time.
Yep, I know that feeling. I remember when I presented at Midwest Dreaming about governance, he was in the back and he had, Brian, I think you were there. He had asked a question regarding Sarbanes-Oxley, and I said, "Oh no." Do I really want to go down this path? Because obviously the depth of his knowledge on any particular topic for that matter is unknown. So, you know, he's just, but like you said, I walked out of that feeling smarter and dumber at the same time. And I like to refer to myself as a pretty intelligent individual, but Peter Coffey, I mean, he's something else. So, but you guys know that out of personal experience.
Yeah, we love Peter. So you're 17 episodes in, and assuming you and Stacey get together to make episode 18, who is it that you want to talk to that you haven't had a chance to talk to you? Like,
Who's
everyone
your-
knows it's Parker Harris for us. So who is it for you?
Who's your dream?
Who's the dream essentially?
Yeah.
I feel like Stacy wants to interview Leah McGowan Hare, and that's one of my mentors.
That would be a great one.
Yeah, she's amazing.
So that's somebody we haven't directly reached out to her, but there are a few people we have that I'm sure will be more than open to coming on the podcast. I want to go all the way to the top of the food chain at some point in time. But to your point, I'm not sure when we will feel ready to, be able to interview or invite Mark to come out and interview and ensure that, we don't completely squander that opportunity. But I don't want to do it just because he's obviously the co-CEO of Salesforce, but I think him being able to share his story in a way that isn't, I'd be interested to kind of hear him share in a very organic conversational manner, like, what has it been like to be the CEO, the co-CEO before he founded Salesforce? There's a video Daniel Peters shares from time to time of Parker Harris in this apartment building when they were first coming up with Salesforce. And it's like, this is crazy. This is absolutely crazy to me. And just to hear his thoughts, if I could hear Parker Harris or Mark Benioff just walk us through, like, what were they thinking? Did they have a business checking account at the time? Like, were they trying to, it would just be fascinating to hear them break down that time era and what they thought Salesforce would be versus obviously what they're now year over year, 20% growth. It'd just be interesting. So I would say, to answer your question specifically, Leah McGowan Hare is somebody we'll reach out to, especially with her new job. Congratulations to her, VP of Trailhead Evangelism.
Oh, yeah.
And then I'd like to see Mark Benioff.
Man, we should try to interview them, Brian.
Do you know anyone that has their email address?
CEO at salesforce.com. Boom.
That's true. I'm not asking him.
I was thinking more for Leah.
Oh, you know what? She has a hyphenated last name, so that's where the X factor is. Because Salesforce, I think they do the first initial last name. So I mean, it
depends on how long you've been there.
That's true.
So
that's a good point.
There's that too. But
I mean, I could totally look it up, but that would be abusing my position. So
yes, don't do that,
Right.
Mark. Don't do that. And
Well, I
as
mean,
a
at
matter of
this
fact,
point,
that should be probably
we have the
completely
20.
edited out of the podcast.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, but then I was like, let me leave that alone. But if
To
Mark
be
and
safe,
Mark
let's go
cover-
back to the
Yeah.
top. We're on site with our guest this episode.
Oh boy,
Yeah, no.
we're breaking the podcast now.
Is there a fourth wall in the pot when you have a podcast?
Oh, there's as far as I know, this podcast has a rubber room. So
Padded rooms?
yeah.
Rubber's kind of expensive.
So who decided that it was going to be, and for the record, I agree, but who decided that it was going to be GIF Squad and not GIF Squad?
Safe harbor.
I knew this was gonna come.
Yeah, that's got to be bleeped.
Oh yeah, sorry. Thank you. Okay, so GIF Squad. The title of the group was Twitter DM, obviously, so we just named it GIF Squad, and it was one of those weird things, Mark, where it was like it was subject to your own interpretation of how it's pronounced, but it was never spoken about until somebody went on Twitter and said, "Oh, it's actually Jif, like the Jif peanut butter," and then this division kind of happened in the group chat where it was like, who thinks it's actually Jif? And at this point, I think we're all on the same page of it being pronounced GIF. But yeah, it might have been Bill Powell that came up with the name GIF Squad. I mean, we were just sharing GIFs at this point. It's interesting. I'll share another fun fact. There were times where we were kind of like, do we want to open this up to other people? And then we kind of said, yeah, if we open it up too much, then it's going to kind of defeat the intrinsic value of what we all are. So we've just said, let's just keep it at what it is, which I think is like 9 to 10 of us. So
All I know is that whenever I tweeted something and got someone on the GIF squad interested in that tweet, it became a madhouse of images because they will share a GIF and then somehow someone else on the GIF squad will find it, and I'll end up with this scrolling page of nothing but gifts coming all from the gift squad. And I was, to be honest, back then I found them extremely annoying. Yeah, they were fun, but I was looking at Twitter as a communication tool. Now,
I've never understood this. I've never understood this idea that gifts are annoying. I've always loved them. I don't.
I love them
until you have
for
too many
what
notifications.
They are, but part of it was probably because of the notifications. But the other thing is, I always looked at it as it's a communication. What are we really communicating with the gift? And considering the fact that I'm a communication major, that was a really stupid thought on my behalf. It's what happens when you leave college for such a long time.
I think that's why I love them so much, though, is because, and now we're getting really off topic, but it's because it is body language that is being communicated over the internet.
Kind of. Sometimes.
Facial language, body language, like even something that's like a cat walking awkwardly wearing booties, like baby booties, it still communicates something via body language, right?
Yeah, like you're a sick person who took a little video of a cat walking awkwardly with booties.
Right.
I'm just copying the GIF that somebody else took the video.
You are procreating the evidence across the internet. You are a co-conspirator in the poor cat with booties. Something. That was going to sound a lot funnier, but I can't think of the right words.
You're on
something.
Right.
Yeah.
But you know what, Mark, you bring up a good point. It adds character to a lot of the conversation on Twitter. I mean, the creativity was how some people react to your questions or comments with a GIF. I don't know. It makes things interesting. You never know.
I feel like I can communicate so much more with an image of a facial reaction than like words don't necessarily do it justice. Like, no offense. Because
I put myself in that situation all the time. Don't worry.
Yeah. On Twitter and email and DMs, like what do we have? We have text. And how often does that text get misunderstood, misrepresented because somebody's reading it with the voice in their head? It's not the same as the person who was writing it. But the facial image or the body image, like some sort of visual medium, much more effectively communicates one's emotions.
Let me ask you something. This is definitely way off topic now. We've kind of gone off the rails.
This is becoming a Peter Coffey episode now.
Right. How do you both feel about, and Brian, you go second because you're the communications major. I feel like you're going to really break this down. How do you feel about emojis and email communications? Work email. Let me preface.
I'm of the Gerholt camp.
Which is?
The Gerholt camp is, he's a fan. Exactly. It's
interesting.
The moment you let your true self be occluded. Obviously, you have to place limits on what you do, right? You can't just go to town and do an entire email out of emojis or even 50%. Like it gets overboard, and you're actually taking away from the meaning of it. They become diluted. They become less meaningful. But having an occasional like, oh my God, I'm showing an emotion in email. Oh, what a sin! Like that's not how we should be treating each other as employees, as coexistence in life. That's my take.
I'm on the opposite camp.
So surprising.
Yeah, I knew that was going to be the case, Mark. So that's why I wanted. He's probably going to get on a soapbox now. Justified, but go ahead.
I'm not going to go on a soapbox. I just don't find it professional because it gets overused. So because it's a text space, I can absolutely agree and see the point. There are circumstances where the text can be misconstrued because you're applying different emotions than what the person who wrote it intended, right? That happens all the time. In that circumstance, having something to emphasize the emotional intent is good, but people have a tendency to overuse them as in emails and everywhere else to the point where it clutters the information. It becomes a distraction, and the emoji themselves are going to get misconstrued. I remember very clearly I was at work and someone sent me an IM that showed a winky face and an eggplant.
Oh no!
Oh no!
That was it.
Ooh,
and you are obviously having the same initial reaction I did. So I decided to get up and walk and have a nice private person-to-person conversation with this person because I'm like, I don't really think this is appropriate for work, and I'm a little uncomfortable with this subject, and I didn't want to make a HR issue. I wanted to do it person to person.
Right, nip in the bud, yeah.
And I get there, and the person said, "Oh, I see you got my message about I have extra eggplant. Would you like some?" Seriously, she had a garden, and she overgrew eggplant. So
now you look crazy.
Well, I didn't tell her why I was coming over.
Right.
So
No, you didn't.
Right, so emoji in of themselves are not necessarily good or bad. It's how they're used, just like everything else. So if I get an email from someone and it's just filled with emoji left and right, it's overkill. To me, it's kind of like someone ending every sentence with a question mark or an exclamation point. It loses meaning if it's overdone.
Yeah, or
that's
caps.
fair. Oh yeah.
And to be clear, like there is a difference between putting in a single smiley face and like the full-on Unicode symbols, like shrug with like 5 characters, 6 characters, or there's different levels that you can get away with in a professional environment.
Well, especially because not everyone's email is going to read the emoticon the same.
Right.
That's true.
I feel one should never be afraid of putting a smile in an email, but the moment you start going overboard, yeah, that's too much.
So I'm going to get us back on topic.
Yeah, wait, how is he interviewing us now?
Wait a second. So you're part of the GIF squad. You have Campfire stories. I have never seen any social media with GIFs for Campfire stories. So other than the very obvious of a campfire blazing someplace, what would be your GIF to explain Campfire stories? If you could only post one GIF to be the, hey, if someone sees this, they're going to absolutely, completely get what our podcast is about, what would it be?
It would probably be, there's a Dreamforce GIF out there from like Dreamforce 17 or 16. And I think I was a part of this campaign, even though I'm not in this particular GIF. But basically, it's of like 3 or 4 individuals kind of coming together from different ends and then kind of putting their arms around each other. And they're all different individuals, age, ethnicity, gender. That's what I think of when I think of campfire stories. Stacy might say some sort of camp, like a burning fire with amber and that sort of thing. But I picture togetherness. So it's, when I think of that, I think of, much like GIF Squad, we have a Campfire Stories alumni group chat in Twitter. So every time we interview somebody, they get added to this DM. So we're having conversations with people within this DM, and now it's turned into this, hey, I'm working on this. Do you have any idea why this isn't working? Or, Stephanie Rhodes is somebody I'm a huge fan of. She works for Hertz. She's 70 years young, and she's a certified Salesforce admin and advanced administrator. She was dealing with some things in her personal life that she confided. She's not a social media maven by any means, but she confided to some of us in that DM. So there's all types of individuals coming together to support each other, and Campfire Stories is serving as the nexus with all of those relationships. So that's kind of. By the way, I'm verbose about everything, so I apologize, but that's how how I would explain that.
All right, ask my question. It's your turn, Mark. I mean, this is how it's supposed to go.
Didn't we have a secondary subject we were going to potentially talk about?
Oh, Justice gave us a whole list of like 5 different things
exactly
that he could talk about because he's an expert at, 4 things. As he can say, all topics he can cover comfortably. And
right,
those topics were...
I have my question. Justice, what were those 4 topics that you were...
Actually, I can't even remember, but I
believe the one we were going to talk to him.
Bullet points. I remember putting them in bullet points or something.
I have it in front of me, but the one that you voiced interest in having the conversation, Mark, was about being an IT leader and what it means today with Salesforce responsibilities.
Yeah, so it's interesting because
that's your title, right?
Yeah. Well, technically, my HR title is IT manager. But I use the term IT leader because a lot of what I do, there are CIO elements to my job. There are director level elements to my job. And then obviously there's the day-to-day administrative management responsibilities. But because literally I am the IT leader for the entire organization, responsible budget owner, the title manager doesn't really encapsulate everything that I do for the organization, as you guys could all imagine, with probably
Sounds like you manage a lot.
Yeah, quite a bit. Titles can be ambiguous in this day and age, but that's a whole other topic. But as the IT leader, my responsibilities are one of several things. So as the product owner for Salesforce, I'm tasked with developing a strategy on maximizing on the utilization and adoption of Salesforce. So what does that really mean exactly? We have X amount of users, and we are looking at all sorts of custom functionality when we don't even have base thresholds of utilization on standard core functionality, right? So now I have to objectively say, why are we looking at utilizing Conga for X, Y, and Z with accounts, opportunities, and contacts when we don't even know how to maximize on standard Lightning features with how you manage accounts in Salesforce and opportunities and contacts? So education, training, reconfiguring and customizing and ensuring that through user stories, what our users are actually doing in Salesforce is reflective of their actual roles and responsibilities. When I first came into my role, and I'm only speaking specifically Salesforce, there's a lot of other things I do that I manage from an overall IT infrastructure perspective, but specific to Salesforce, everybody was a system admin when I came in, which my users didn't know that, but that didn't change the fact that within their system permissions, the modify all data checkbox was checked. That's just the reality of it. So being able to scale that back introduced more problems than I would have anticipated, because there were a lot of processes that were linked to the ability to be a system administrator. I know that sounds kind of backwards, but basically I had to do a lot of deep diving to understand, why does this person, how was the functionality in Salesforce developed in such a way that me removing their system admin standard profile would, it would actually disable their ability to do their job. So what sort of configuration and development occurred here that wreaked this sort of havoc? So it's just been about having the past experience with Salesforce and understanding standard functionality, custom functionality, and how I can restructure our usage so that the utilization and adoption of Salesforce was one that was measurable.
I'm glad you're going down.
Yeah.
So this is my question, Justice.
Yes, sir.
What's your metric for utilization? How do you know you're doing your job?
Okay, that's a great question. So if I walk by your computer screen and you're still in spreadsheets, I'm not doing my job. If you are navigating out of Salesforce to do job-related tasks that should occur in Salesforce, which happens a lot in my environment, then something isn't right. But to track utilization specifically for me, Brian, it's really about understanding. I created visual workflow documents that basically outline for each given process area, this is what the starting point is in terms of, creating an account, maintaining an account, and then transitioning an account, right? And understanding all the integrations with all the other systems. So if I'm able to look at roles and responsibilities and understand what level of activity should occur in Salesforce and what level of activity should be occurring outside of Salesforce. So if I see users that aren't carrying out set activities within Salesforce, then that tells me that there's a knowledge gap or there's a permissions gap in terms of their inability to do a payable entry in Salesforce or associate an email, whatever that looks like. But there's no real, and maybe I'd be open to hearing what your experience is too. There isn't any dashboard that I have that says, okay, today the development department achieved 75% utilization in Salesforce, right? There isn't anything like that I've come across, managed package or custom or standard. But yeah, it's just basically monitoring the day-to-day activities and ensuring that that's occurring in and out of Salesforce. That's how I do it. That's a good question.
Thank you.
That's a very good question.
I asked that.
I'm still thinking about it too.
I asked that because it's one of the more popular questions I've gotten when I'm at Dreamforce's events is having someone say, I'm trying to do this. I had a person come up to me at, I believe at Midwest Streaming 2 years ago, maybe a year ago, who said the exact same thing, but it was more along the lines of management wanting to know whether or not he was doing his job, right? So what would be an appropriate metric for a Salesforce administrator? And in my world, it's really difficult to measure utilization because to do that, you have to define utilization in such a way where you can measure the utilization inside Salesforce and outside Salesforce to know what the total is. Because otherwise, you don't know. And that's not a report you can run in Salesforce because no one's going into Salesforce and say, hey, I spent 3 hours outside of Salesforce today.
Yeah.
You practically have to do it with surveys,
That's exactly what I did. I go down with surveys, but I looked at it more of how happy are people doing their jobs or using Salesforce. And because my goal out of the surveys was to figure out, are people happy with what's going on? Is there something that they're unhappy with? And is there something that's explicitly they would like to do but cannot do with Salesforce? And it was a very, very short survey, and I sent it out at least twice a year. Quarterly was my goal. And it was always formatted as like a net promoter score type thing with a little comment box at the end.
So I'm in the current process of transitioning to Lightning right now, and I hired on a project manager. And he sent out a survey recently. And I thought this was, I don't know why this never crossed my mind, but he built a phenomenal survey that basically broke it down in very digestible terms. Are you a basic user? Like, do you understand how to navigate Salesforce? Are you an advanced user? Do you know how to create, applications within Salesforce? But he had maybe 7 questions to gauge utilization. And just based on the responses to that survey are telling me one of several things. One, if people are responding to that survey immediately, then that gives me metadata. That gives me data to basically say, okay, this is what their perception of their usage in Salesforce looks like. The people that aren't responding to that survey either A, don't care, or they don't use Salesforce. So that then becomes another conversation. But I love what you alluded to, Brian, of that's something I could do quarterly. And, as a baseline, I could say, hey, this person, John Doe, said this in Q3 of this particular fiscal year, and then in Q1 of the following fiscal year, his answers changed just slightly. What was that? So there's a lot of things that can be extrapolated from the trends there. So I like that. Maybe
I aggregated it by team, so the results was somewhat anonymous. Because my assumption was, for example, if you're on the Northeast sales team, that your experience with the process of what you're supposed to do in Salesforce is like everyone else in the Northeast sales team.
Mm-hmm.
So I was looking at it from the standpoint on average, were we across the groups of people, and then looking at the median scores for those groups, and then I can find out, is there someone who's really above or below that? Because those become either power users or people I need to reach out to.
Mm-hmm.
But I also took a lot of stats, and I'm kind of a nerd that way. So that's just me. I had one day where I was like measuring the bell curve of my Salesforce users, but I had nothing else to do that day.
Nerd.
Is there anything, Justice, that you would like to bring up since you have the audience?
I love what you guys are doing with your podcast. Just because I've seen, much like you said about Campfire Stories, I've seen a wide range of individuals interview on your podcast, Brian and Mark, and there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason on even the format. Whether you're doing a live interview at Midwest Streaming, literally on a table, a makeshift table with microphones, or Brian's holding like a little portable podcast thing going on with that. It's just crazy what you guys do. But
hashtag everything is content.
Exactly. And I have not seen anybody else do that. But what I would say is just listen, if you guys are, anyone that's listening to this podcast, and you have an opportunity to have working experience in this ecosystem, reach out, find somebody that you can inspire, or reach out and find somebody that you can learn from and continue that sort of intoxicating effect, because I think the more people we can get more informed on what Brian's doing, what Justice is doing, what Stacy's doing, what Samantha Safin is doing, that creates more avenues for people to say, hey, I could do this or I could do that. And ultimately, you know, one of the things Mark Benioff, I'll say here in closing, committed to recently with the White House is 1 million jobs for workforce development. And when you think about just the trends of the economy, obviously at some point in time, there's going to be an economic downturn, and the emphasis is going to be around those jobs in which people can skill up or reskill. So the fact that we have this ecosystem that has this vehicle of Trailhead for easy learning on what's going on in this kind of fourth industrial revolution, I think we need to be stewards in terms of, hey, you know, anytime we have a platform like the WizardCast podcast to share how we've gotten to where we're at so that other people can be inspired. So that's my soliloquy.
And if people want to find Campfire Stories podcast, where should they go?
They should go to Twitter. Stacy's going to be mad that I don't have this memorized, but our Twitter handle, I believe, is SF, as in San Francisco Campfire. We are on Twitter. We recently joined Facebook, so we've started doing live videos again. Like I said earlier, the cadence is TBD. But Twitter is our primary audience. Follow us on SF Campfire. We're also on YouTube.
Really? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right. I'll let you.
I was going to let you do it.
You're always the one who does it.
Yeah, but you said, all right. You're keying it up. So
Now
I was going to do it.
Witnessing this back and forth.
I'm
that we
very
typically
nervous.
do. We cut this
Okay.
out.
Yeah,
No.
I mean, I was going to do it, and you go, all right. I'm like, oh, okay, he's closing.
Go ahead, Brian.
No, you go ahead. It's your turn.
Are you guys like chatting on a Skype for Business chat or something? Is that
No.
No. No, this is
Okay.
us just giving each other eye looks.
Oh, you guys are from that.
We're
me and Stacey are gonna
basically-
have to build that. Yeah,
We're basically an old married couple by this point.
yeah, that's what it seems like.
All right,
Yeah,
Justice,
Stacey,
well,
I call my PIC, so I get it. Go ahead. Sorry.
all right, no, I'm see, he knows.
Listen, you are interviewing another podcast host, so like,
confused.
This is surreal.
no, it really is.
Okay, fine then. Justice, why don't you take us out?
Wait, take us out?
Yeah, end the interview.
Oh, Justice, I want to thank you for joining the podcast. This has been a great episode. We appreciate you sharing your perspectives on what it means to be an IT leader at Hennepin Theater Trust, and that you're a co-host on SF Campfire Stories with Stacy. If we want to find the Campfire Stories on Twitter, what handle do we want to look? You know, that's a great question. You would go to... Okay, I don't know.
If you did that without breaking,
episode.
I would have been
I
so
know.
impressed.
I know. Listen, when you've done this enough times, you've got this thing memorized. Stacy usually has me do the intro and sometimes the outro. So yeah, I've got it basically memorized.
Yeah, so make sure
So
you guys check out Justice and Stacy over at Campfire Stories, SF Campfire on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. They're also on Apple Podcasts if you're one of those weird people listening to podcasts on an Apple device. Like almost everyone.
The majority, yeah.
Yeah, I just
Yeah,
ostracize
the majority of the
80%
populace.
of our audience. They're out there. Do a search for Campfire Stories. Salesforce you might want to throw in there because otherwise you might get ghost stories. And that is not something you want to accidentally listen to.
With the kids in the car.
Thank you, Justice.
Absolutely. It's been a treat, guys.
WizardCast is produced by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, directed by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, technical administration by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, script writing by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, audio editing by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, website maintenance by Brian Kwong and Mark Ross, and our intern this episode was Becca Miller.
And you can be an intern too. Just follow us at WizardCast_pod on Twitter.
Or just share the pictures you take with us at Salesforce events and we'll make sure we add you to the list.
Have a joke, interview suggestion, or other comments? Let us know. You can call and leave a voice recording at 608-492-0321 or email wizardcast@thewizardnews.com.
And you, yes, you, the one with the blonde streaks and highlights. We want to hear from you. If you could ask Parker Harris one question, what would it be?
Submit a question by going to bit.ly/ParkerQuestions and fill out our short form.
And we will be doing another Idea Exchange highlight where we review ideas on the Idea Exchange. That's the title. If you have an idea you would like us to highlight and talk about, let us know.
Go to bit.ly/idea highlight to submit an idea to us.
Don't forget to subscribe to the WizardCast and receive our next episode automatically.
Please post reviews to Apple Podcasts, aka iTunes, and share this episode. It helps others to hear what you just had to endure.
Once again, I'm Brian.
And I would make another Lord of the Rings joke, but all the good ones, Aragorn.
Legolas?
Thanks for listening. All right.
Okay, see, so he did the arms, you see? So that's usually an indicator. The episode is wrapped up.
Thank you for doing this podcast justice.
Oh, God.
That's how we need to end it.